Fora TV. The world is thinking.
I want to focus briefly on one idea that you may not know all that much about, but that's been very important at the state level. It's something called the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights. It's a constitutional amendment that was passed in Colorado in 1992. And since then, it's been latched onto by Grover Norquist. He calls it the holy grail of what he hopes to achieve at the state level throughout the country. And his group, Americans for Tax Reform, funded by the same institutions and foundations that I mentioned earlier, has pushed in states throughout the country to try to get similar amendments or statutes enacted in those states. Last year, 16 states around the country at least seriously considered Tabor-like either amendments or laws. It went before referenda in 3 of those states, was defeated in those 3, although in Ohio it was adopted as a statute, which is a somewhat less restrictive version of it than Colorado has. What Tabor says basically is that the state budget in Colorado in any given year can't exceed the level of the previous year plus that year's level of inflation plus population growth. And in the event of a recession, the standard for the following year is a lower income, lower level of revenue that's collected during the recessionary year. That part of it's called the ratchet effect. You know, the idea here is that this will make government more efficient. You just have a threshold that you can't pass. Anything that comes in above that threshold has to be refunded back to the taxpayers. The author of the amendment is a guy named Douglas Bruce, who was sort of Colorado's counterpart to Howard Jarvis. He was a cantankerous real estate investor. He had run-ins with the IRS. In drafting what ultimately became Tabor, he had done versions of it every couple of years, beginning in 1986, that differed wildly from each other. He basically sat at a typewriter back then and wrote 1,500-word amendments to the Constitution that he then got on the ballot and he fought for. And when they lost one year, he would do the same thing 2 years down the road. Sometimes he'd throw in property taxes, sometimes not. In any case, in 1992, he did finally pass the amendment. It was the year Ross Perot was running for president. Perot did better in Colorado than just about any other state. It is a conservative state, generally speaking, in the old-style version of conservatism, but their taxes weren't unusually high. This wasn't analogous to the Proposition 13 situation where you really did have this big run-up in real estate values coupled with very high increases in property taxes. Colorado wasn't confronting anything unusual. In any case, this thing passed, and over the course of the 1990s, conditions couldn't have been much better in Colorado. The economy continued to grow as it had been before Tabor took effect. A lot of people were flowing into the state, so that helped to raise the threshold higher than one might have expected. Inflation was relatively high in the state because real estate values were increasing so much. But even under those conditions, Colorado's rankings, according to just about any measure you want to look at in government performance, whether with respect to health care or education, began to decline fairly significantly. And then in 2001, there was the recession, which hit with a vengeance under Tabor. And both Democrats and Republicans in the state widely agreed that Tabor was responsible for severe cutbacks that would have to be implemented there. I'm going to tick off a few little statistics here so you can get a sense of it. You know, by 2005, by the way, Colorado is the 10th wealthiest state by median income, okay? By 2005, Colorado dropped below at least 45 other states in the following categories. The share of low-income residents covered by Medicaid, the portion of low-income children lacking health coverage, the percentage of low-income adults under 65 without health insurance. Colorado's national ranking in access to prenatal care declined from 23rd in 1990 to 48th in 2004. Student-teacher ratios in Colorado are worse than in all but 8 states. The ratio of teacher salaries to private sector salaries is the lowest in Colorado among the 50 states. The state's higher education system has declined to the point where legislators were wondering if we were going to just get rid of our higher education system, we should have voted on that as a separate matter rather than just having it deteriorate to the point that it deteriorated. What do those rankings mean? Colorado ranks 6th worst among the states in deliveries of low birth weight babies. When the state tried to create a prenatal plus program to deal with that problem, they had to shut it down because they didn't have enough funds to pay for it. Colorado has the worst level of whooping cough in the country, and up until the end of the 1990s, it was in the upper half of
Mississippi?
Well, exactly, and that's again and again you see these analogies to Mississippi being made about Colorado, and it's all because of Tabor, okay? And in the whooping cough case, there was a shortage of vaccinations in the 2001-2002 period around the country. Most states decided to spend more to be able to get the extra vaccinations. Colorado decided it couldn't do that, and very directly that led to this increase in whooping cough, which is actually a fatal disease for children under 6 months 6 months old. Many of the schools are in severe disrepair. There's a school that was written about in the Denver Post that had sewage going through the hallways. It had temperatures in some rooms of 80 to 90 degrees because of the lack of ventilation. Republican state legislator there said the fact is the state doesn't have any money. We can't do anything about it. This is the holy grail that Grover Norquist continues to go around the country, as does his network, pushing as a model for how government ought to function. And I think it speaks for itself as to what the conservative movement has become. It is primarily about, in one way or another, not necessarily openly, but indirectly trying to convince people that they need to significantly curtail or weaken the government. And the consequences in Colorado don't bother them.